every year, I've reassessed my loans. I've re-uploaded my data to the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center for the calculation to simulate what my best options are moving forward. And I think the best piece of advice that I've learned over the past year or multiple years is that you should never just pick a plan and set that as your only plan moving forward, because your salary will change and your situation will change and your long-term and short-term goals will change. And so that's been my most helpful thing to keep in mind, because your strategy may change too.
That is Dr. Shiloh Landskov, a recent grad and practicing veterinarian. And this is the VIN Foundation's Veterinary Pulse podcast. I'm Jordan Ben-Shia, Executive Director of the VIN Foundation. Join me and our co-host and VIN Foundation board member, Dr. Matt Holland, as we talk with veterinary colleagues about critical topics and share stories. Stories that connect us as humans, as animals, as a veterinary community. This podcast is made possible by individuals like you who donate to the VIN Foundation. Thank you. Please check the episode notes for bios, links, and information mentioned.
All right. Thank you for joining us. This time we have a couple of guests, and the three of us are all representatives from the VIN Foundation in one form or the other. So we've got the VIN Foundation A team today. A regular guest, Dr. Tony Bartels, who you might recognize, and a new guest, or maybe a returning guest from a while ago, Dr. Shiloh Landskov, a recent graduate. And I will let the two of them introduce themselves, but specifically, we're going to focus today on our loan repayment journey. So as we do introductions, I would like to talk about, when we graduated, around, with about how much debt, et cetera. And since I'm going to be participating in this conversation today, I will kick us off with introductions. So my name is Matt Holland. I graduated from Illinois in 2017 with around $200,000 in debt, and that was all from veterinary school, no undergrad debt. I had already paid that off. And my wife, we got married in the last year of veterinary school, had around $70,000, and that was split up between undergrad and graduate school. And I'll pass it over to Tony.
All right. I'm Tony Bartels. I graduated from Colorado State's combined MBA DVM program in 2012. I finished with around $140,000 of student debt, and then I married a veterinarian also from Colorado State, who had a little over $220,000 of student debt. She's a small animal internal medicine practitioner in Denver, where we live. And I would say 99% of our student debt was from veterinary school. I had a little bit from my undergraduate education at Purdue University, but the lion's share of our student loans were from paying for our veterinary education.
I'm Shiloh Landskov, and I am a 2020 grad from the University of Illinois, and I graduated with around $380,000 of debt, and some of that, a lot of it is from undergrad as well, just because I did go to a private undergrad and didn't do a whole lot of paying off of that, so they both combined to a whopping almost $400K of debt together. But luckily, my husband did not go to vet school, so we spared some debt on his end.
Yeah, and I guess I should add that my wife is also not a veterinarian, just for context. And so you hear that we have three different stories, different journeys, different decisions to make, but also obviously a lot of similarities when it comes to the kinds of things that we have to consider. And so I would like to draw on draw on that several times during this conversation, as a reminder that everybody's situation is different at the individual level. And so when we talk about like things you should be doing or shouldn't be doing, or the right way to do things or the wrong way to do things, there's a lot of variation at the individual level. And so that's why we have three different people at different stages of their journey to talk about the same kinds of decisions. So this idea to have this discussion came from a conversation around the idea of paying off debt as fast as you can, and specifically comparing paying off something like credit card debt as fast as you can versus paying off student debt as fast as you can. And I will just to start the conversation, I will say that there was a while, and this time extended to past when I started veterinary school. So there was a long time when I thought that paying debt as fast as you can was generally a good rule of thumb, because debt is generally bad. So you generally want to, get rid of it sooner than later. And so I don't think that way anymore. But we'll get into, the nuance of how that changed and why, and the differences between different kinds of debt. But that's where I'll start with my thoughts around that topic.
Yeah, and I think that is a common, certainly a common belief, and for good reason, right? I mean, generally when you borrow any kind of money, whether it's credit card debt or student loans or mortgage for your home or a practice loan or whatever, right? There's, it's the idea is it's really not yours until you've paid off the debt that you incurred to have that purchase. And there's definitely some good logic behind that, but when it comes to student debt, it's a little bit different and significantly different recently, just because of all the different methods that are available to pay back your student debt. So now we have to start separating those things out, right? It's not sufficient to just lump them all into the same bucket, because they have very different repayment methods, which means we have to analyze the repayment strategies separate from each other to see which one is going to fit best in our given circumstances.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's a huge stigma around debt itself and between, different generations of students. And there's a lot of different opinions out there on how to pay it back too.
And so yeah, if we get into like all these different opinions on how to pay it back, or why to pay it back, why not to, when not to. And something I mentioned earlier, like the right way to do it versus the wrong way. Can we start with things that like we definitely should be doing or shouldn't be doing? And as an example, I'll use, so if you're a vet student listening to this, and you're thinking about, should you be paying off the interest that's accruing on these loans while you're still a student? Tony, I'll ask, like, is there a hard yes or a hard no, like a hard and fast rule that you should or should not be doing? You should or should not be paying off interest in school?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, right? Again, I would say generally speaking, you should not be paying the interest off while you're in school, because most people who are doing that are using their student loan funds to pay back the interest on their student loans, right? And that is not helping you gain any ground at all, right? So if you have the ability, right, the excess funds to make payments to your interest while you're borrowing as a student, then you probably borrowed too much, right? You borrowed more than you needed. And it's always better to borrow less than it is to just pay the interest associated with your student loans, because the principal is what generates the interest. And if you're only paying the interest, the principal is still there and it's still going to continue to generate interest, right? And there's probably better things that you can do with that money as you're living like a student, than paying the interest while you're in school. And borrowing less would be one of those, but having an emergency fund would be a close second, right? So you don't have to incur credit card debt, which is also quite common among veterinary students.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I want to touch on some of it in a bit, but I will also want to compare and contrast where somebody like Shiloh might be, because I think, Tony, you and I mean, we set up our repayment before COVID was, existed, and we're kind of at this different part of our journey versus Shiloh, graduated in 2020, and then the class of 2021 is also in this very different place than you or I were ever in. And so can either of you talk about, considering that, like things you would do or wouldn't do because of that? And I don't know if that's too vague, but I know we were talking before we started recording, Tony, something that you're getting, you said, worried about, that piqued my interest.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess what I'm worried about or worried about is the fact that there's now two classes of recent veterinarians who have no experience with what student loan repayment looks like. And that's because of the pandemic forbearance period we've been in. And that started in March 13th of 2020, and it shut the interest off, it shut the payments off, but it also allowed those of us who are using an income-driven repayment strategy to also still receive forgiveness credit during this time. And that is due to end at the end of this coming January. So January 31st, 2022 is scheduled to be the end of the pandemic forbearance period, which means those of us who have not had their loans in repayment before are going to start to experience repayment in February of 2022. And it has given people some license, I guess, to not have to worry about their student debt. In other avenues, it may give them a sense of, hey, well, I can just throw a bunch of money at it now while the interest is off, and I can, see if I can put a dent in it long term. And both of those really, I think, are kind of unfortunately, short term misfires, because you really have to think about your student debt in a more long term strategy to see how exactly it's going to play out in repayment, to know whether or not you should not be making payments now, or you should be making payments now, or you should be focusing on other areas of your overall financial wellness.
And yeah, so that's a great, hindsight is 2020 perspective from the expert. And so Shiloh, as somebody who is living this, and not just yourself, but you could speak for some of your colleagues that you are interacting with, and their stories too. But what are people like you experiencing, and what kind of decisions are you making, and thought process are you having around that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to unpack there. And I think even between our three stories, and then going further and saying even between 2021 and 2020 grads, we have completely different mindsets, because we had totally different experiences. With 2020 grads, sure, some of our clinicals were canceled or moved, but really we were only affected in the last few months of our schooling, and then immediately into the workforce. And we had already pretty much had a plan moving forward, and then kind of got this fun surprise, or kind of a nice surprise right as we graduated, that, well, actually you don't need to worry about your payments for the first however many months. But really, to us, that didn't change our plan, because we already knew, at least, in my experience, that our income-based repayment plan, at least for me, would already have me at zero interest, or not necessarily that, but $0 payments. And so it was just nice to have an added little zero interest on there. And then the 2021 grads, they were just mainly focused on getting their experience and trying to survive fourth year during a pandemic as well. And so I feel like they definitely put the loan stuff on the back burner, and they didn't have as much, hand holding per se, or at least as much guidance as I felt that the 2020 class did up to graduation, because they were all just trying to struggle through, the middle of a pandemic. So it's hard for me to say what the 2021 grad experience is as far as, strategies, but I know that a lot of my peers, we've just kind of been enjoying the 0% interest and honestly having more questions from it, while also appreciating that we can take a little bit of a break as far as giving payments. But I know that there are a lot of people having questions, should I be using this time to pay it down quick, or should I use this money for other things like Tony was saying? Should I be putting it towards payments for my house or my car? And so I think it's definitely super individual on what the actual answer is to that. And I think a lot of people are frozen almost, as Tony was saying, he's a little bit worried about, are people going to maybe just ignore the loans because we haven't had to think about them for a while? And how do we get people to really analyze their strategy and figure out what their plan is moving forward in a time that's really not, we don't even know what's going to happen in the next 6 months.
Yeah. And I think this is, circling around these, like how these differences express themselves in individual plans. So I'll use myself as an example. And if I were only focused on accruing the most wealth, I wouldn't have, I was living, well, I don't know if you do know, listener, but I was, because of the pandemic, living with my parents and saving a lot of money. And then I moved out because it was a quality of life decision. And I would do that 10 out of 10 times. But somebody else who wanted more money than I'm currently saving, or wanted to save more than I am, would have stayed if that was their, primary interest. And so you have to, to the extent that you are able, know what is important to you, so you can know where to channel your, the different parts of your budget. And so I wonder what either of you think about that as it relates to these things we're talking about. When Shiloh, when I hear you say, should I be, the question of should I be, paying this off or saving up for that? And that word should makes me think of a lot of that is up to the individual. What should you be pursuing is up to you on a lot of levels. So yeah, I wonder what either of you think about that.
Well, I would say that yes, a lot of this is up to individual decision, but you have to start, and you alluded to it, right? You have to start with a budget, right? Just like clinically, we have to start with a physical exam of our patients, and we have to evaluate the empirical evidence that we can collect to make informed decisions. The same thing happens with finance, right? We can come in with a preconceived notion that I want to pay my debt back as fast as possible, whatever the debt is, right? But then the next step in that thought process has to be a numerical analysis, right? You have to do the basic physical exam to know what paying your debt as fast as possible even means for you, right? So you have to you can start with the, individual choice and how you want to unpack that plan, but then you have to start putting the empirical evidence in place to execute it, right? And that starts with a budget, right? It starts with looking at your student loans and knowing which repayment plans you're currently enrolled in and which ones you're available to use and what your monthly payment's going to be or could be when repayment starts back up, and how does that fit in your budget. Because the people that I see that struggle the most are the ones that, before they even know what their budget look like, they say, well, I'm going to pay $3,000-$4,000 a month towards my student loans. And it's like, all right, well, what is that going to do, right? Is that going to actually pay your balance off? How long is that going to take? And what is that going to do to your budget? Which means, you're likely sacrificing other areas, and how long will that sacrifice last, right? So, it's all wonderful to have ideas of how you'd like to pay back your student loans and try to stick with, something that fits in as fast as possible realm. But you have to actually do the analysis to see if that's something that can even be financially feasible for your circumstances.
Yeah, and I think that in school, at least, we had a lot of discussion between students, oh, are you going to pay it down quick, or are you going to do the forgiveness plan? And in the beginning, not a lot of us had much to base it off of, besides the fact that we would discuss what our lifestyle was going to be like. And so, if you want to pay it down quick, people tend to mention the fact that they just want the debt off their shoulders. They don't want to think about it. And that's, like you said, Matt, a quality of life decision that could be different from person to person. And so other people may say, I want to buy a house, or I want to have children, or, I want to travel or do certain things that you would need to take that from your budget, inherently taking that out of your repayment budget. And so it's definitely dependent on the person, what the right thing or what you should do, not necessarily a set plan that everyone should follow.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if Tony did this on purpose, but I feel like it was a perfect segue into, well, that's where the rubber meets the road, is like, getting anxious about all of these important things. I mean, they are like, I'm not saying that, getting anxious is overreacting, but when you start to notice that, well, then like look at it and make a physical exam and, approach it systematically that way. And so the reason I said, I don't know if Tony did this on purpose or not, but the way, like the best, if not the only way I know how to do that is through the VIN Foundation. I did that for my own plan when I was a new grad, and I set up a meeting with Tony and then posted my situation on the message board. And that's how, because I'm putting myself in the shoes of the listener and thinking, well, how do I, okay, I hear what Shiloh is saying, and I can figure out what's important to me, like quality of life things. And I hear what Tony's saying, and I want to put those things into a physical exam and figure out my budget and what goes where. And so I'm tying those two things together by saying, I recommend, if you're in this spot where you're not quite sure what to do, use the VIN Foundation. Go to the Student Debt Center and start a conversation there with you and your colleagues. And that is a tried and true way, in my experience, to get the help you need.
Yeah, it really does. It starts with that initial physical exam, which is taking stock. And what we call it is your student debt income and signalment, right? And that is going to help you uncover all of those items that you should be looking into when you're building your overall financial wellness plan and your student loan repayment strategy, right? So what is your student debt balance? But what is it comprised of? Is it predominantly federal student loans? Are there private student loans in there too? Do you have credit card debt? If you're employed, do you have access to employer-sponsored retirement plans and health insurance or health savings accounts? All of those things that are going to factor into your overall financial health have to be considered, so we can then start helping to prioritize those items that you should be considering ahead of an aggressive student loan repayment strategy, right? So, I mean, there's certain things, again, and this kind of comes back to, I love the idea of starting with I have an idea or a plan to pay my loans back as fast as possible. But if you're leaving other, critical areas of your financial wellness off the table to do so, you may not be doing your overall financial health all that much in the long run, right? I mean, there's certain things to me that, are just non-negotiable, right? You don't forego saving for retirement in favor of paying more towards your student loans, right? You don't forego having adequate health insurance or liability insurance or life insurance if you have a family, right? Before you start paying extra on your student loans, right? You don't forego an emergency fund, right? You don't forego, credit card debt, right? I mean, there's certain things that you really have to start prioritizing, even though that student debt number might be the biggest one on the ledger. There are other areas of your financial wellness that rise above what that student debt is actually doing to your financial wellness.
Yeah, therein lies the what should I be thinking about, and what should I be aware of? I think all the things you just said, the things you wouldn't forego, those are the things that we talk about when we say they aren't up to the individual, but they also, like, every individual has to think about them too. And so that's why it's when I say it's the best, if not the only place to get that kind of help, is because these people, like the three of us, have been sharing our stories in that space on that message board for how many years now, Tony? And I don't think there's any other place that has that collection of people who have been in the position that you'll be in, or that you might already be in if you're already graduated.
Yeah, it's almost been 10 years now. So yeah, there's a huge collection of information and experiences and what to do and what not to do is kind of advice that lives in that VIN Foundation and VIN student debt message board area.
So Shiloh, on what Tony just said, like what to do and some advice, like what, when you think about you or people in your position, do you have anything that you haven't mentioned, or that you'd like to emphasize that you already have mentioned, but anything that you would like to impart on, either students or recent grads that you have found to be something that gives you peace of mind in this area, something you do or something you don't do?
Yeah, I think one thing to note is that, I've always considered myself to be one of the students that really looked into my loans and at least wanted to learn more about them and how to pay them and different strategies, because as a person with anxiety about loans, it definitely helped me to just understand them more and the process of, what my options were and not necessarily the best way to go, but the best way for me in that moment. And one thing to emphasize for me is that every year throughout school, and then, this past year since graduating, I've reassessed my loans. I've re-uploaded my data to the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center for the calculation to simulate what my best options are moving forward. And I think the best piece of advice that I've learned over the past year or multiple years is that you should never just pick a plan and set that as your only plan moving forward, because, your salary will change and your situation will change and your long-term and short-term goals will change. And so that's been my most helpful thing to keep in mind, because your strategy may change too. And I think that's important to consider, that you shouldn't just, you can set some things and forget them, but I think your strategy should always be on your mind, and you should consider, both short-term and long-term goals. And for me, that was buying a house and, replacing my old broken car and, improving my quality of life in the short term, but also obviously considering the long term with retirement plans and savings and emergency funds and all the things that Tony has already mentioned.
Yeah, Great advice there. So for me, I would agree with that. I would add, I check for peace of mind. I check my credit report. That I don't ever expect to see anything surprising there, but that's also because I check it, regularly enough that I now have that peace of mind. And then I know we've touched on budget, but I noticed a big decrease in my own anxiety around this when I made a budget. And even when the budget wasn't going as planned, I was like, oh, I'm spending more than I expected to. I still felt a lot better about the whole process because I could identify what was happening instead of just have, vague anxiety.
Yeah, but budgeting is eye-opening, right? I mean, when you actually, and I know I've been there, so many people tell you have to have a budget, right? And I am one of these people telling you have to have a budget, but it's true, right? You cannot manage what you don't measure. And it's amazing what you'll find in there if you just start tracking your income and expenses and where your money goes. Like I am shocked at how much, as a veterinarian, we personally spend on our 2 dogs. Shocked, right? But until we sat down and actually laid it out, I really had no idea how much.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing, and not that that even led to us even changing that amount in any appreciable manner going forward, but knowing that it's just powerful, right? I mean, you have to, and you'll find any number of other areas in your budget that meet that same level. So
exactly, and I mean, I can just speak for myself. I don't know if other people see it this way, but I had the same experience with my own 2. We have 2 cats, and it didn't change what our plan was. You're still gonna do what we're gonna do and get dentals and everything, but it's like Sudoku. It's like, well, once you know that fits, then it kind of makes it easier to see where the rest of everything fits. And that for me was the decrease in anxiety.
Yeah, and I actually recently, so I have, I track my income and expenses and everything, but I recently put together a spreadsheet of my, me and my husband's salaries, our loans and our debt and our, car payments, our insurances that we pay for renter or home insurance and, life insurance and all of our savings and investments, and even just having all of those in one place. Even though I'm not changing anything about what is going on there, it definitely helps me see any holes that I need to fill with, do we both have our Roth IRAs maxed out or things like that it can help you visualize what's going on kind of from afar rather than just one by one, trying to scramble through life every day and feel like an adult with a Roth IRA and a retirement account, just having it all in one place. And then also having all of your student loans next to that is really helpful to see what payments you need to make on other things and not only hone in on the student loan debt.
Absolutely. I think that's outstanding. And I think the real value of that too is the percentage that each of those items occupies in your budget, right? Because that's when you can really start to do some adjusting, right? When you start to see, well, how much of my income is actually going towards short and long-term investments, or how much of my income is actually going to my student loan payments. And then if you do get, because a lot of veterinarians are paid on production, right? So if you get a production bonus once a month or once a quarter or at the end of the year or something, then you can kind of look at your budget too and see, well, if I want to allocate this production bonus, how best can I do that? And you can use your budget and generally how those percentages of items occupy your budget to allocate that production pay bonus as well.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to say, kind of going back when Matt asked, what I wanted to emphasize is that once you take a look at everything, it can be super overwhelming, especially if you don't really know, if you feel like you don't know what you're doing with it, because, we didn't graduate with a finance degree or anything like that. Consulting with, certified financial planners is definitely one aspect of that. But also just once you have it all written down of what you have, it's okay to walk away for a couple weeks and, let yourself calm down and then come back to it, change one thing at a time, or just think about, what you want to do moving forward. It doesn't all have to be done at once. And I just worry that people will, think about it, get super overwhelmed, and then push it away for 6 months and then repeat in 6 months.
Yeah, I was going to say that one thing that budgeting helped me with was not getting any more cats, which is only a half joke, but yeah, just to repeat, it does help you see where things fit in. But it's only a half joke because I would always get more cats. I think my wife is the reason we only have 2 and not our budget. So I think unless either of you have anything to add, I think this has been a great discussion. Our plan is to try to turn this into a blog post too, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But thanks for joining us, and I'll let Shiloh or Tony add anything they'd like.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoy talking about this stuff and just making awareness that you don't have to know everything and there's not always a right answer. But as long as you're thinking about it, that's doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that. You do also have some bonus time here to work through everything, right? So, again, we are in that pandemic student loan forbearance period that'll last a few more months here, and that's take advantage of that opportunity to start building that budget and start looking at how your loans fit into that when repayment does restart, and that it's not going to blow a hole in any areas of your financial wellness overall going forward. So, and if you have questions, reach out. Again, we've got a lot of experience, particularly with dealing with the ins and outs of student loans, and also trying to just help you wrap your head around the start of a budget and planning and working some of those priorities into your budget going forward.
Yeah, exactly what Tony said. If you need us, you know where to reach us. Find us, email us. Hope to see you on the message boards. And thanks again for taking the time to listen to our conversation.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Veterinary Pulse. Please check the episode notes for additional information referenced in the podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, subscribe, and share review. We welcome feedback and hope you will tune in again. You can find out more about the VIN Foundation through our website, vinfoundation.org, and our social media channels. Thank you for being here. Be well.